In Module 4, we are going to introduce our first set of plank-related activity. And again, we are maintaining our focus on pelvic alignment, on breathing, while we are stepping up the demand on the core stabilization. All right, we're taking everything that we learned on the supine exercises. Now, you're not gonna have the feedback of the table. So we've got to make sure that those skills are solid before we move into this next module. And again, you're breathing this whole time. You're breathing into the low back, you're breathing into the sides of the ribs, you're breathing into your low abdomen, and this new skill of breathing into your sit bones, breathing into the pelvic floor. As you're inhaling, those areas are expanding. As you're exhaling, those areas are recoiling back to the center, okay? So this next exercise is gonna start to bring out the stretch of the pelvic floor. So you start with your hands directly underneath your shoulders. You're gonna bring your knees as wide apart as the yoga mat, or basically like wider than hip width. And then bring your toes together. And then we release the toes so that your ankles get a nice stretch as well. So now you try to make your spine as long as possible, because this is a skill that's gonna carry over into a lot of our plank work. So your head's reaching forward, your tailbone is reaching straight back. You take a big inhale, filling up those parts of the body. As you exhale, you're reaching your sit bones straight back towards the wall behind you. So for those of you that have done yoga a lot, you're familiar with child's pose. We are doing something like that here. However, there's a point where those of us guys who are tight, we tend to start to round the back, and that is not bringing us to the direction that we want to go. So what we're doing, we got to make sure that we're finding that same pelvic stability. So for you, Willie, what I'm noticing is that we've got to get your tailbone to lift a little more in this position, because I think your hamstrings are tight. Okay? Now, you're inhaling, you're reaching the tailbone back, and we're noticing we get a little bit better motion that way. And then we're continuing to breathe as we come back. So on this exercise, just ensure that you're breathing. It doesn't matter so much if you're inhaling or exhaling on the different phases. Just make sure that you are. So let's say inhale and exhale. And so Willie's perfectly demonstrating here that he's stopping right where he starts to get tight. Now let's show him at home what happens when we go back farther. You see how the tailbone tends to drop? Okay, so that's why we're stopping right when we start to get a little bit tight, right around here, okay? So this is our just hip hinge exercise. If we get this right, this sets us up well for being able to do heavy kettlebell squats later on, back squats, deadlifts. If we get this organization between the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the sacrum, if we get this going well, then we're gonna set ourselves up for being able to progress without running into a painful episode again, okay? Next exercise, bring those knees in for me, Willie. Those knees are directly underneath the pelvis. And then this next exercise, as we inhale, we're gonna bring the right hand straight ahead. Exhale, bring the right hand back to the ground. Great pacing on the breathing too. Inhaling the left hand now. Exhaling, release that arm. Then we bring a little attention into one leg going back. So now left heel reaching towards the wall behind you. Okay, and then again, you're trying to extend the leg as far as you can. And this brings out a lot of tightness in the hamstring, in the hip flexor, and then bring that left leg back. And then we're gonna bring the right leg back. So that's the gist of this exercise. And then what we're trying to do is make sure that as we're moving these limbs around, this is where the rubber hits the road. We're gonna do that all again. We're gonna make sure that we're keeping our lumbar and pelvic area long, okay? So will you feel that length here? So imagine that you've got, about a foot of length between your tailbone and the middle of your back. You want to make sure that that area is staying super long as you're moving your limbs around. So Willie, let's try that again. Try to keep this area in your low back super long as you're moving that right hand straight ahead. Yeah, that's really good. So notice the limb motion might not be as good at first, and that's okay. Let's bias towards having pelvic stability, okay? And breathing too. Try that left arm, yeah. And you'll start to notice there might be things rocking around, and that's why what you might do here is, put a towel on your back. You might put a belt around your abdomen to try to increase the feedback of how you can feel your pelvis swishing around as you're trying to figure out how to apply the stability lessons that we have on your back to this quadruped position. Okay, you got the arms going really well. Now let's go to the legs. So let's try that leg in, and this is a lot more difficult. So you got to stabilize into all three limbs on the ground, and then as you're starting to extend that limb, you just stop at the point where you start to feel your low back tilt, your pelvis tilt. Let's try this right leg. So this exercise, you might try about 6 to 10 per limb, just kind of gliding around from arms to legs. Okay, excellent, and we're breathing. Okay, we're gonna move into our next position here. Take up as much of your yoga mat as possible. So Willie, bring your hands all the way to the front of the mat. Bring your shoulders on top of the hands. Bring the feet all the way to the back of the yoga mat. So we're gonna come into our first plank. So you're gonna tuck the toes under, maybe 1 foot at a time, start to extend one leg, and you start to feel how what we just worked on, or you're stabilizing your pelvis, now bring that other leg into it. Okay, now for those of us at home that are saggers, go ahead and let your butt sag all the way. Okay, you feel what that's like? There's nothing going on in the front. Okay, now some of us are hikers. Lift that pelvis up too high. Now, this allows us to overpower with the arms, but our core and our pelvic muscles aren't doing much. We're gonna try to go somewhere in the middle, and you should feel a slight tremble. So sag first, okay? Lift all the way, and then find somewhere in the middle, okay? And then hold that position. Let's talk about alignment here. You're reaching back through the legs. You're pressing down through the hands. We gotta make sure we got those hands directly underneath the shoulders. Yeah, so reset there. Yeah, excellent, okay? Because that's gonna give us a lot more stability for the shoulder. So we get the shoulders, not to be, let's say, the limiting factor of this exercise. And take a break for a second. Okay, set the knees down. You can go back to that quadruped position. Yep, and just send those hips back for me. There we go. And we come right back into that plank. We'll talk about 1 or 2 more things in this position. Let's go back to plank again, Willie. Okay, so we've got where our pelvis is located in relation to the ground, okay? So you feel that little bit of subtle pelvic lift here, okay? Now we're gonna talk about 2 things. We're gonna get our whole fascial system lit up here. We're gonna keep the hands and feet exactly where they are, but you're gonna twist into the hands where the biceps rotate out, or let's say the elbows draw in towards the center. Okay, you feel that, how that activates different things in your upper body. Now with the lower body, you're gonna keep your feet still, and you're gonna try to reach the heels to the side of the room. Or another way so that's the way we're going, but you're not gonna let your feet move, okay? So the feet stay still, and then your inner thighs, that's helping the inner thighs rotate to the ceiling. So if your knees are really squeezing together, this is gonna get a little space for your pelvis here, okay? And then take a rest, and let's try that one more time. So go ahead and take a child's pose here, and keep your hands like forward a little more. It'll feel better for you. Yeah, there we go. Keep your hands all the way forward. Yeah, and then bring your hips back to child's pose. There we go. Release these toes. There we go. Okay. So make sure you're giving yourself a good little break between these sessions so that if you are getting overwhelmed, just come back to the breathing. Come back to that movement in your pelvic floor. Okay, let's try it one more time. Because if we get plank right, it helps us with a lot of things that we ramp up into. So then here, the elbows draw in towards the center. The heels are reaching apart. and your thighs, your inner thighs reach up to the ceiling. So that just inflates this whole lower abdomen, and it gives space for the sit bones. It draws the tension from the hip flexors out and up towards the ceiling. Okay, our next position, we're going to downward dog. So from our plank, the hips lift. You can bend your knees as much as you need to if you have tightness. Your tailbone lifts, and we're going to apply those same 2 cues. The elbows hug inwards. That's what gives you a little bit of stability around the thoracic spine. The heels reach apart. That's what unlocks a little bit of tension at the inner groin. And we breathe. And then always take rest. Go ahead and set the knees down. Take a child's pose. And breathe into the pelvis. Make sure you let it unlock before you move on. And try it again.